Welcome to the MTT podcast. I'm Super Dave. Today, I'm super excited to be back with you on this podcast. Today, we're talking about the Twilight Zone. In my pursuit to be a doctorate in sport and performance psychology, I come across journals every week. I read a lot of journals. And this past couple weeks, I was reading about the Twilight Zone. So today, I'm going to be referencing two sports psych journals. One of them is the Organizational Psychology in Elite Sport. The other one is Ice Hockey Coaches' Perceptions of Athletes' Leadership. And so I want to take you back to 1959 to 1964, where there was a series, a television series called The Twilight Zone. And The Twilight Zone was this science fiction, fantasy, horror series that really explored time travel, alien invasions, in a parallel universe. And so inside this parallel universe, it was kind of like this strange series where it was like these other universe existed in the universe that we live in, and it brought in these different characters where they dealt with social issues, racism, and Cold War paranoia. And so it was like this different world, this different zone they called the Twilight Zone. And so I was reading about this in one of these scientific journals about how there are different countries. Obviously, all countries are looking for sport dominance. And so specifically Olympic committees were looking at this idea, they were exploring this idea of, is there a difference between the way organizations see their athletes, and is there a perception of the way that athletes perceive the organization? And so what they did is they basically defined this area of the Twilight Zone, this area that was kind of strange. And was it fantasy or was it real? And so they went down this idea, and they actually put some science behind it and some research behind it. And what they found was that, yes, there is a gap in the perception of the organization and the perception of players. And so they deemed this area the Twilight Zone. And so here's what they concluded in the article. They concluded that there were different expectations and there were different goals of the organization had different expectations, the players had different expectations, and the same with the goals and the communication between the organization and the athletes. And so what they came to the conclusion to is that we, in order to have this dominance across the world stage with our Olympians, is that they really came to the conclusion that they have to have open and honest communication, both sides. They have to align their expectations and goals, that they have to have better performance feedback measures for athletes and for the organization, whether it's the GM, whether it's the coach, whatever that may be. Better training and development. One of the things I thought was interesting is there was stress amongst athletes on travel. And so what they had done years ago, they knew this, that they wanted to create a compound for athletes just to live. And, we see with our Olympians that most of them live in Colorado Springs, where everything is there. The laundry, your boarding, your food, your coaches, all the training and development is all right there in Colorado Springs. And so they sort of eliminated that gap by allowing athletes to come and play and compete and train under one area. So I thought that was interesting. The other thing they found out is there needs to be flexibility and adaptability. And the last one, which is my favorite, is for both sides, whether it's the player or the coach's side, that they need to be more empathetic. And so how cool is this? That there's a gap, there's an area of perception between what the organization sees the athletes and the athletes see themselves in the organization. I just love this because it doesn't take talent or skill. It's really just knowledge of understanding that, hey, if I'm a coach, if I'm a hockey coach right now, how do I plan to win, or how do I plan to dominate my team or my league, or win the Stanley Cup, or win the conference, or win an NCAA championship? How do I do that? Well, let's entertain the idea that you could be in the Twilight Zone. That's fun. And so in this other article, what they deem is appropriate is that we really need to understand that there's a mutual respect between players. So I'm taking these two different articles, these sports psychology journals, and I'm basically giving you an overview of both of them. And then at the end, I'm going to come to a conclusion of here's kind of some simple things we can do. So in this other article, they're talking about, okay, this is for ice hockey's perceptions of goals and of athletes and athletic leadership. What they said is we need to have mutual respect for players and coaches. So players have to have mutual respect for coaches, and coaches need to have mutual respect for players. They need honesty, that the organization needs to be honest. Consistency, competence, reliability, openness, empathy, good communication, and credibility. So I look at these two lists of these two and I say, okay, how do we bring this down to an area where we can limit the gap of the Twilight Zone, or create a bridge so the Twilight Zone, we can go over the Twilight Zone, or shrink in the area in the Twilight Zone. So maybe some of it exists, but not all of it that we don't think that's out there that really is. That's exciting to me. So if you're a coach listening to this, I just want to give you 4 tips here. 1, let's be aware that it may exist. 2, let's have empathy for players. Mutual respect to your players is something that's very powerful. When a player knows that you appreciate, love, and respect their opinions and their thoughts, there's an internal motivator that it's exponential what that player will give to you. Let's communicate with players. I get in a lot of conversations with a lot of different players where they're the 7th or 8th defenseman or the 14th or 15th forward. And I say, hey, how do we get back in the lineup? And a lot of times it comes back and they don't know. They don't know what they need to do. They don't know how they need to play, right? So coaches, I think coming down and saying, okay, there is a path to get back in the lineup is a good thing. And here's what I need you to do, right? I need you to be faster. I need you to move the puck east and west. I see you moving the puck, it's north and south. That's not our system. Having that feedback is really powerful. Okay, and then lastly, having mutual respect for your players. Super powerful. Now, back in, I think it was 2003, it was 2003, 2004, 2005 was really where USA Hockey, I may have gotten those dates messed up, but it was right around then where USA Hockey was starting to introduce the ADM model. Okay, and that ADM model, what it was before the ADM model was there was one coach out there putting players in lines, and it was stop talking, shut up, stand in line, just watch me do the drill, and then you go do it. We would go up and down the ice. There'd be 8 to 10 lines on the ice and 5 or 6 players deep, and the practice plan was that. Now, maybe we would spread them out in the corners and everybody would wait around and wait for their turn. So instead of 8 to 10 lines, you'd have 4 lines in a corner and longer lines, and people would wait. And the practice plan was really solely upon you or the coach to figure it out. And USA Hockey came back and said, you know what? We don't want you to figure it out anymore. We don't want one team on the ice. We want 5 and 6 teams. We don't want 15, 20 players. We want 40 and 50 players. Instead of one station, the whole ice being the station, we want 10 stations on the ice. And we want players shooting, passing, stick handling in all these different stations. And so what it did is it took the power away from the coach at an early age of, say, U14, U12, it was ADM. And so this is where it started to turn, I believe, where I was part of this. I was part of this sweep where, a lot of coaches say, you know what, ADM will never work. And it's going to be about me creating the drills, and I know what works. And so the power began to switch, I believe, at that time to say, you know what, it's not about me, the coach, and everything I say, and you just be quiet and do it. Now it's more about collaborating with your team, your players. I think the days of the joystick coaching are gone. You know, yelling from the bench on every stride and every shot and every pass. Like, those days are gone. If you look at the high competitive teams now at any level, coaches are not yelling and screaming from the bench. It's just, those days are over, man. Those days are over. And so when we have mutual respect for our players, we're asking them what they need. We're collaborating with them during the week. I've always looked at, and I'm not the key to the success here, I know that, but when I look at practices and I look across the landscape and say, okay, what are practices? Practices are our opportunity to teach. And then what are games? Games are the opportunity for us to see how well we taught during the week. So, you know, having good performance feedback, doing a good, better, best. Hey, what was good? How do we get better? How can we perform at our best? Is a better question to ask. Okay, so coaches, I just really want to help this situation of, let's reduce the Twilight Zone by recognizing it, being aware of it, right? Recognizing it, having empathy towards it, communicating with our players, and then have mutual respect for our players so that we can help reduce the Twilight Zone. All right, players, if you're listening to this, right, all the responsibility is not on the coaches. It's also on you to be aware. Have empathy that this Twilight Zone exists. Communicate with your coach. A lot of times when I talk to players, I say, hey, why are you not in the lineup, right? What's going on? When's the last time you talked to your coach? A lot of times you haven't talked to your coach. That's on you. That's on you to communicate to your coach on how you need to play. It's on you to grab video. Grabbing video of yourself during games is fairly easy now, right? So grabbing the video and say, hey, coach, how do you think I did? What should I have done differently? Is a really good idea, all right? Be reliable, hardworking, and consistent with your hard work and reliability. You know, players, if there's nothing more frustrating for a coach to say, you know what, one day he shows up, the other day he doesn't, I don't know which kind of player I'm going to get. So when we're looking at the Twilight Zone, this area between what I see, what I perceived you to be, and what I perceive you not to be from the coaches and the player's perspective, we want to reduce this gap, create a bridge over this Twilight Zone so that we can play at the upper ranges of our ability consistently under pressure in the biggest moments. I just want to read you a couple of quotes here from a coach who said, if I want to control everything, I'm not developing anything. Let me read that again. If I want to control everything, I'm not developing anything. So players, coaches want to help you. They want to be there with you and grow with you, but you've got to be ready to grow with them. And that means being fit. That means being ready. That means eating right. That means planning to win, right? And that means sacrificing some things, right? And so that the coaches can be there helping develop you, right? Here's another. They must learn to fly on their own. They must develop initiative. I'm here to guide them and to give them the tools to help them achieve tasks A, B, and C. When I give them responsibility, they develop leadership. When I give them responsibilities, they must be accountable for them. So this is a two-way street. It's not a one-way street. Gone are the days where my way or the highway rules. Those days are gone, right? And so now it's a collaborative effort. This is how we plan to win. You know, being a Christian sports psych coach out there, I do recognize and believe that we have something else to give, right? We have something else to give in terms of why we're playing hockey, and that's to glorify the Lord with our talents and our abilities. When we're glorifying the Lord with our talents and abilities, then, man, there is an internal motivator where we can really excel in life. And that's where Ephesians 6 comes in, of really putting on the armor of God and being the best version of yourself. You know, and so you are not, I work with so many players who believe that their identity is in their time on ice, right? It's in their goals. It's in their assists. It's on what level they're playing, whether they're in the NCAA or when they're in, the ECHL, the AHL, USHL, the NAL, NA3. Like, your identity is not in what league you play or how many goals or assists you get. That's not what your identity is. Your identity is in glorifying the Lord with your talents and your abilities, no matter what level you're at. And so when we're treated this way, when we understand ourselves, right, that we are not there to just be a player to put up stats, that we're there for a higher purpose, we're now having a collaborative conversation with our coaches on how we become the best version of ourselves. So it's not about just showing up and just showing up for practice and just being a just being a player that just does what they're told in terms of just showing up. I want to say you want to be there for a deliberate practice. You want to be there so that you're there for a higher purpose. And I really want to encourage you that the Twilight Zone exists, that we want to go out there and get it, right? We want to plan to win. I love to say, if you don't plan to win, you're planning to lose. And so I just want to encourage you, coaches and players out there, the Twilight Zone is real. It exists. Let's not pretend it doesn't, and let's start having collaborative conversations. Let's align our goals, right, and our expectations with each other so that we can kick butt. All right, till next time, have fun with the Twilight Zone. Love to hear your comments on this, whether I'm crazy or not. Love to hear some comments on if you read these articles, what you got out of them. Let's go win. Let's go get after it.